Let me get this.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Kayfabe with Keaton, episode 50. We're going to be bringing in Jamie McParland. Before we're bringing him in, I want to have some very good news to get to here. So, I was at a local Northern Irish wrestling show, and I met none other than the first ever women's intercontinental champion, Deborah Valkyria, which I couldn't believe. And it was an incredible Titanic wrestling show. Also, got a photo with the Beige, and also one half of the NXT UK Tag Team Champions, former NXT UK Tag Team Champions Mark Andrews, and the Titanic Wrestling Tag Team Champions, the Bad Guys. This was such an incredible show to get to and stuff. So I'm very happy with that. And none other, and I can't wait to get to this guest, none other than Jamie McParland. And we're going to waste no time. Let's bring him in, Jamie McParland.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on.
I'm very excited.
Yeah, I'm very excited to be having you on. You know, my Crusher's told me a lot about you, and I've also read the book. I read the book and the DVD and stuff. You know, of the NWF, and I've become quite a big fan of you.
Nice. Thank you.
And
I
sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say only one of us has had a match for the NWF title though, so I'm
See,
psyched to be talking to you.
Crusher told me that I had to correct you on this. That you've had a TV taping match against him on your very first match.
I don't know that it was for the title. Maybe it was. I don't recall that. I don't recall me ever getting a shot. I did a lot of losing. So
Don't know which one's right this time. But
yeah.
anyway, let's get straight into it. So, what's your very first memory of wrestling?
Uh, my very first memory of wrestling was staying over at a friend's house, and in the morning, his family was watching AWA wrestling. I believe it was on a Sunday morning, and it was just wild to see these big giant guys screaming at each other on TV. You know, it was not like anything I'd ever seen before, calling each other out, and then the mayhem happens at the at the interview booth, and then yeah, gets into the ring, and yeah, I was just blown away by it. And then I think my when I first started getting into wrestling was I watched Saturday Night's Main Event.
Yeah,
So when I was a
WWF.
kid, yeah, I love stand-up comedy and stuff like that, and sketch shows and stuff. So as a kid, I was big into watching Saturday Night Live, and Saturday Night's Main Event preempted Saturday Night Live for a few years. It was like once a month, but in the same time slot and same channel. And so I went to watch Saturday Night Live, and there's Hulk Hogan, and Junkyard Dog, and just the production level was way higher and way different than AWA, and that's how I fell in love with wrestling, was watching Saturday Night's Main Event. So
And this was so when you watched the AWA, this was before the Vince McMahon takeover. I'm guessing.
yeah. Yeah, I think Hulk Hogan had just left, but he had, Jesse the Body, and I believe Mean Gene was still on, that sort of thing. So it was just I came in right after Hulk left. So which
And
the AWA was weird, because I felt like when we watched WWF, I'd see Hulk Hogan a lot, who was their champion. But in the AWA, I think Rick Martel was the champion, and I think the entire time I watched AWA, he was never on, which I thought was weird.
strange.
Yeah. So I don't know if they, you know, you would think that your champion is the person that, brings in the eyeballs, and so I don't know if that's why, they didn't put Rick Martel on, and so they kept it so you had to pay to see Rick Martel at at a live event, and that's why he was never on TV. Um, and I mean, they did that with Hulk to some extent, but he was he was at least being interviewed and stuff like that. He wasn't maybe every week on their weekly syndicated show, but you definitely saw Hulk, and I think that was probably a mistake, maybe on Vern Gagne's part, is to not have the people that everyone wants to see. Their champion is just never on their show. It's like a band putting out a record with a hit song on it, and then you're a radio station and you never play the hit song everyone wants to hear.
Exactly.
So
I think I think the main reason I think the main bad idea with that is I think 90% of the people that go to the shows would have obviously watched it on TV. So if they don't, and they would know who their big wrestler was, so it wouldn't make
right,
sense.
yeah, no, that makes sense. Yeah, so if you hear any noise, it's my dog. Let me know, and I'll bring him
Okay.
upstairs. He insisted on coming and sitting by me first. So he's a pug. He makes a lot of noise.
And so then when you were in with the when we started watching the AWA and WWF, who was your main idols in wrestling?
uh, I was a big fan of Hulk Hogan at the time, Macho Man, Ricky Steamboat, um, and in the AWA, Larry Zbyszko was a great talker. I feel like
Yeah.
for a heel. Um, and then the Road Warriors. They weren't always in the AWA, but when they were, I mean, they were just. And to this day, I see people talk about great tag teams and stuff, and I know that at a technical level, those guys weren't
Mm.
the best tag team, but at an entertainment level, holy smokes, they come out to Iron Man, they're wearing the, spikes, and they got the, when I was a kid, I was a Kiss fan, so they're wearing makeup, and I liked punk rock, and Animal had the mohawk and Hawk had the reverse mohawk. I'm like, this is like all my favorite shit rolled up into one thing, and they, just run out into the ring and press slam and just destroy everybody in a few seconds, and so they were such a great piece of entertainment, because I mean ultimately that's what wrestling is. It's a
Entertainment.
mix of it's like a soap opera for men,
I
because
get what you mean.
there's
Yeah.
there's multiple storylines going on, and um, it's like athletic soap opera for men, and so they had the great storylines. Paul Ellering was such a great talker for them, because I
Mm,
don't know that they were great talkers. Um, well, now I think about it, they were pretty good talk. They scared the shit out of you,
I
So,
get you.
but Paul had that, that he was a lot more eloquent than those guys. But yeah, they were amazing. And then I'm trying to think who else in the AWA. AWA was great because they had so many people. Well, they were still part of the territory system, I think, even though they weren't really part of the NWA. And so a lot of people would cycle in and out, unlike the WWF, where it was, this kind of the same people all the time. So the fabulous Freebirds would come in for a few months and then leave, and that sort of thing. So it was always, I always felt like the AWA was pretty fresh. Um, but I gotta say that my favorite uh, wrestling thing to watch back then, after my initial discovery of wrestling, was Jim Crockett Promotions.
Mm,
And I call it the NWA, even though the NWA was the bigger group. I don't know. I guess I just always think of that as the NWA. But that, even as a kid, I was probably 11 or 12. Um, I I always appreciated when people didn't talk down to me like I was a kid. Um, like those were my favorite teachers that, talk to me like a person, not like a baby. Yeah,
yeah, I get you.
And so uh the WWF, after watching it for a while, started to feel a little childish to me, which to me was kind of like insulting. Um Even though, I was 12 or 11, well, I was a child. Um but the Jim Crockett Promotions and the NWA seemed more real. Like, the guys were in shape, but they weren't steroid monsters. You know what I mean? Their storylines weren't ridiculous. People, there wasn't somebody who was like a chicken, or the Red Rooster. What the hell are you guys doing? They were regular, Southern dudes that you thought, oh, these guys have a beef with each other. You know what I mean? They're not uh, some superhero character, Uh, and so I think my all-time favorite wrestler is Arn Anderson, who,
Oh, I like him.
yeah, he never was the world champion, wasn't a giant dude, but he was like super technical, super believable on the mic, could talk on the mic and make you think that, he hated your guts and he was going to kick your ass, you know? And so the NWA seems so much more realistic to me. Um, Unfortunately, and the funny thing is, I don't know how much you know about the states, but
Yeah, like the
most
territories.
it's most I feel like the state where the most wrestlers came from was Minnesota, which is my state.
Yeah.
And I mean, Ric Flair was raised in Minnesota. Even though he's from South Carolina or whatever. Like, no, man, he was adopted and raised in Minnesota. Went to elementary, high school, and college in Minnesota. Started out training with Vern Gagne. Um, uh, and the Road Warriors are from Minnesota. I think Scott Hall. Uh, just so many wrestlers were from Minnesota, and so um, my point was, there's so many wrestlers from Minnesota, and the only, I believe, when I lived in Minnesota, there was only ever one NWA show that came to my
It's
city,
crazy.
and I missed it. Yeah, and so I was super bummed about that. It's like, oh, it's Ric Flair coming home. Like you would think he would be wrestling here all the time, but they just for whatever reason they were on cable TV in Minnesota, but didn't make a whole lot of shows up here. So
Yeah.
that was disappointing. But
And then, so then you're obviously, you can tell by the way you're talking, you were a massive wrestling fan when you were a kid, and you probably still are now. And when you first got into, I believe you first got into wrestling, actually attended an NWF show.
I did, yeah. So I'd seen so once I got into wrestling, watching AWA and WWF and NWA, um, I wanted more wrestling. And excuse me, cable TV was pretty new at that time, so it was a bunch of channels, and I used to just click around looking for more wrestling shows. And so I did find um, what was it, WCCW, the
World Class Championship Wrestling.
yeah, yeah,
Von
from
Erichs.
Texas. Yeah, the Von Erichs. God, you know all kinds of stuff. I love this kid. Uh, sorry, I shouldn't call you a kid. Um,
It's fine.
and then the Memphis wrestling, which I also liked Memphis wrestling a lot with Jerry Lawler and stuff,
Yeah,
just
Jerry.
because it was so gritty. Like their cameras were shitty, their ring looked all beat up, and like they'd have a match, or you have them show the match from like the Mid South Coliseum or whatever, and it's like the first match of the night, and there's still blood stains on the on the canvas from like God knows how many events before that. And you never saw that like in NWA where it's like, or WWF where there's just like a blood stained canvas, that they can't get the blood out. That would have never happened. But in Mid South, like that was the thing, and so that just made it seem more gritty and real, to me. And so yeah, I liked watching Mid South as well. But um, yeah, I forgot. Oh yeah,
Yeah.
so while I'm flipping through these channels, I come across public access, which in the United States is the federal government lets companies have a channel on the air, basically, and I think the airwaves are owned by the public, and so in order to get that privilege, cable companies had to allow the public to put stuff on the airways, and so they had to. Uh, Sorry, my dog.
It's okay.
Um, hey, do you want down? Okay. And so they had to allow the public to put a certain amount of content on one or two channels, and the public they could put anything they wanted on, and that's when I came across NWF, um, and it was kids not much older than me wrestling, and I was like, oh my god, I could do this. Like not that I really thought I could do this, but it brought it that much closer, because I was um in my living room and on my bed, pretending to wrestle and stuff like that. And then I, saw these kids in a real ring wrestling. And so um, on one of the shows, one of the TV shows, I saw they were having an event. And so I went to the event and, well, I talked my grandmother into taking me. Went to the event, sat in the first row. And at the time, um, I think the prevailing thought about wrestling, because people would be like, "Oh, it's fake," blah blah blah. I feel like a lot of people at the time thought some of it was fake, but like the bigger matches were real.
Yeah.
And so like even adults, they were like, "Oh yeah, this stuff is BS," but when Hulk's wrestling, like that's real.
Yeah.
Um, which is interesting because
I
that
think it was
kind
the
of
opposite.
well, it kind of signals to me that like the better the wrestler you were, the more believable it was. Um, and obviously, the more seasoned you are as a wrestler, the less mistakes you're making, because wrestling is a lot like doing magic tricks, where there's things happening sleight of hand or in the background that you don't notice as a viewer, like when you're press slamming someone, you're lifting them up, but if you notice, they have their hands on your shoulder and they're also lifting themselves up, you know? So you're not actually lifting a 300-pound guy, you're lifting
Yeah.
maybe 175 pounds and they're helping with the rest of the weight. But a regular person doesn't notice that. And, if you think about it, it's like sleight of hand, like magic, where they're cupping whatever in their hand and then, you're surprised it's not in this hand. And so I feel, so I kind of feel like wrestling back then was like amateur magicians and professional magicians, the guys that are in the upper mid card to main event guys were so good at the magic of it that people thought that what they were doing was real, but maybe the lower, the other matches were fake, so, um, anyway, so I don't remember at the time if I knew that wrestling was a work or not. But we went to the match and it was great. And the final match was between Crusher and I think Pretty Boy Taylor under a mask. I can't remember if he was wearing a mask at that time or not. But
And I think you got a bit of work excited at that, did you?
what's that?
I think you got a bit of work excited at that.
Yeah. So and I remember uh uh or maybe it was Larry, Luscious Larry. Sorry, this is like, 40 years ago at this
Yeah,
point.
I understand.
One night 40 years ago. I mean, an important night in my life, but still, memories get a little cloudy over time. Um, but I remember my grandma getting really upset about what was happening in the ring, the unfairness. And for some reason in my life in general, I have this issue with fairness. Like when I see people taking advantage of other people or things that are not fair, it makes me incredibly angry. And I always try to do something about it, and it drives my wife crazy, right? Because she calls it teaching lessons. So Jamie's trying to teach lessons to people, right? And so when I see somebody doing something shitty to somebody else, or butting in line or whatever, I'm the guy that says something about it. And a lot of times when I do it, it's the wrong thing to do. Like I remember going to a rock concert, just a small concert, and this guy was trying to push up through in the audience. He was trying to get in front of a bunch of people, and so I just kept blocking him, right? And we're waiting for the band to get online, and I just kept blocking this guy, kept pushing him back and stuff. And finally, he's like, "Dude, I need to get through. I'm the drummer in the band." Right? He's trying to get on stage, and here I am blocking him, like teaching him a lesson, like about fairness, right? And Jamie, whatever Jamie was doing right then was the wrong thing to do. And so my wife is always like, stop trying to teach people lessons. Anyways, um, so when I saw my grandma getting really angry about the unfairness that was happening in the ring, I had it. And so I jumped in I don't know what, inspired me to do it, but I jumped in the ring and I think I kicked at somebody and then jumped out. And, so it was no big deal, but it was all caught on film. At the end of the night, I remember we were walking out, and I think it was Crusher was like, "Hey, aren't you the guy that jumped in the ring?" And I said, "I'm really sorry about that." And he's, from there, he was like, "Do you want to be a wrestler?" And yeah, it just kind of unfolded from there. So it's funny to think, wrestling was a big part of my life, and as an adult, telling people like, "Oh, I was a wrestler when I was younger," is such a crazy thing, because there's not a lot of people that do that.
Especially when they were
And
kids.
yeah, especially when you're kids. And the crazy thing is, I can tell people that now, and I have that experience now, literally because of a split-second decision where I decided to jump in the ring. Because there were plenty of other kids, at the show. Nobody else jumped in the ring, and nobody else ended up being a wrestler from that. So that split second decision of, you know, impulsiveness now, is a big part of my life. So take that, Jennifer, my wife, telling me not to teach people lessons. I got to be a wrestler because I tried to teach somebody a lesson. So,
Well, if you didn't get into that ring, there's a chance you may not even been a wrestler, which is crazy
oh,
to think.
absolutely. Yeah, I would have never, because, I think when kids do stuff, a lot of, I think a lot of the wrestlers that were in the NWF were in the NWF because they knew Sean not from the NWF, from either from school or from his neighborhood or friends of friends or whatever. I had, at least my recollection is I had none of that. Although Dixie Dave, we did go to school for a little while, and he keeps telling me that he somehow introduced me to Sean or something, but that's not how I recall it. So maybe
You
he's
don't think
right.
it's true?
I I I I mean, it's entirely possible he's right. He may have a better memory than I do, but that's my recollection of it. So yeah. So yeah, I don't know that I would have, because I wasn't in that sphere of, in the neighborhood, or I didn't go to school with Sean, or I don't. Yeah, I would have never wrestled, and that would have been a weird. It's weird to think about, how, because throughout your life you can kind of trace things back to key moments in your life that, had they not happened, your life would have been a much different trajectory.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to kind of go back and, if I had like erased that day from happening, what would the trajectory of my life be at this point? You know, so um, yeah, pretty interesting to think about stuff like that.
Yeah, it is. And when you after you became, you got to know Sean a little bit more. At what point did you have your first match, and who was it against?
Boy, that is a good question. I I feel like it was a while, um, but in reality, it may not have been. When you're, there's an interesting thing about time, and I hope I'm not boring your listeners with non wrestling talk and philosophical old man talk. But when you're 10 years old, um, a year is 1/10 of your entire life, right? When you're 50 years old, a year is, a much shorter percentage of your life. So as you get older, time seems to go quicker. Um, I remember going to school, and it was like December 1st, and we were counting down to holiday break at school. And it seemed like it took forever to get to holiday break. But now, months, I'm like, oh my God, it's already August. Like I feel like summer just started, and we're already, at the end of summer. And so time seems to go much quicker as you get older. Um, so at the time, I felt like it took forever for us to have a match. I think around that time when I got involved with Sean, things were kind of slowing down, and they weren't having as many matches. So I think it, and there was some intermixing with, he was bringing in some of the bigger guys with the NWCF or NCWA, I think was
Oh
the
yeah, yeah.
adult league that was kind of
With
mixing with
Steve and
us.
Larry.
Yeah, with Steve and Larry. So I, 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 I I feel like things took a lot. There was kind of a hiatus there, and then they were able to get us those regular wrestling events at the place called the Dry Dock, which is a non-alcoholic bar. And then we started having regular, like, weekly tapings and stuff like that. So I think they were weekly tapings, um, but yeah, it took a while to get to my first match, and I honestly don't recall any training before my first match. Uh, yeah, I don't know that. I would love to say like, oh, Sean took me aside and taught me all these moves, but I don't recall that being the case. So I do recall them forcing me and Dave to jog. And I think that was more of a hazing thing than anything else. They were like, oh, you guys need to warm up. You need to go jog for a mile, which was, we were just chubby little Midwestern kids that were drinking Mountain Dew and eating candy all day. So jogging for us was not pleasant. But yeah, I think that was more of a hazing thing than anything. So,
And for
um,
sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, and who my first match was against, I can't believe, but I can't remember.
Was it
I don't.
Terry
Yeah,
Block?
what's that?
Terry Block was it?
It might have been. Um, and the funny thing is, I've seen it I've watched it in the last couple of years, and for some reason I can't. I don't remember who it was, but yeah, Terry Block might have been right. Right. So
And I'm sure this match wasn't the best, obviously, because you'd have just not got any training. Obviously, Cursor always says even at the time the training was when you got into the match, which
yeah,
is crazy.
yeah,
For now, people get so much more training. Even for my match with the NWF Championship, I got a lot of training. And for you making your debut match, you didn't, as you said there, you didn't get much training.
no.
So what was that like, knowing that really didn't really know what you were doing, and you were going out live to cable TV?
It wasn't too bad. I think I was more excited than anything. And also, I had watched so much wrestling that even though I hadn't been given any training or, um, even practiced a lot of these moves, I'd seen it so often. I was like, oh yeah, I can do this. I can do a drop kick. I can do a suplex, right? Right. And I did too bad. I think, you
Feels
know,
like we lost Jamie for a second here.
oh yeah. Um, yeah, I think it went okay considering we had
You
little to no
back?
training. Oh, I'm sorry. Did you lose me? We're
Yeah,
all
we lost
back.
you for a second there.
Oh, sorry about that.
Yeah, we're all back.
Um, yeah, I think the surprising thing about my first match was, I was so excited that my heart was beating fast, and then the next thing you know, you're running, between ropes and in holds that are limiting how much air you get. And so my heart was beating even faster than it had already been beating. And I was probably in my, you know, at 13 years old or whatever, you're in pretty good physical condition. And I just remember being in the ring thinking how tired I was, how out of breath I was and how hard I was breathing and that sort of thing. Um, and it was partially because of what we were doing, but a lot of it was, it was the excitement of being in there really added on to, uh, yeah, how fast my heart was beating and how hard I was breathing. But after the match, I loved it. When I was a kid, I was always a kind of a show off, and so, um, like we used to do this. I used to do this thing when I was really young, when I was probably 5 or 6. Whenever our family would come over for like dinner or, just a get together, I had these like colored lights I set up in my bedroom, and I would stand on my dresser and I would lip sync Kiss songs and dance. And my family members would like throw change at me, which was, which is a totally weird thing to have happen. But think about being a little kid and the impression that would have on a little kid, um, enforcing like, oh, performing is great because you get this adulation and you're getting money. And so, from a very young age, I really was like into showing off or performing, and so wrestling was that, it was like I get to perform, I get to, scream on a mic and then, do acrobatics, and do the strength stuff. And so, yeah, wrestling really, being a wrestler really appealed to me. And so, being in the ring I, it was great. I mean, I'm sure, it's great, to,
Yeah, it feels
to
great.
entertain people and show off. And yeah, it's so much fun. I mean, anybody who, dreams of being a wrestler, it's exactly what you think it is. It's exactly as great as you think it is. So,
Yeah. And I'm just going to bring in some comments from viewers here. Seems like Gizmo was here, big NWF fan. I believe Gadget Gizmo asks, Jamie, how mad was Crusher when you jumped in the ring? Now, what was your first impression of Sean?
uh, after right after I did it, I realized how inappropriate and stupid it was to do. Um, and I felt like I was going to get in a lot of trouble, which is funny. Like, I mean, how much trouble could I get in? It's not like they're going to call the police on me, right? Right. But
Yeah,
I kind of felt like that, like, oh my God, I like totally trespassed on this thing. Um, and I think Sean kind of played it up at first, like, what were you thinking? Right. But then I think that only lasted for about 5 seconds. And I think he was almost kind of busting my balls about it. Um, and, ultimately, I think he liked the balls that I had to do that, you know, um, and saw that as, this is, and that's, I think, why he invited me to um, wrestle was he saw, the drive that I had for it, the conviction of, um, my ideals and that sort of thing. Um, so yeah, I think it was a good thing I jumped in the ring, even though I wouldn't suggest it, and especially don't jump in the ring at a WWF or a AEW event. You'll get your ass kicked. But, and
just
thankfully
by
that didn't
security.
happen to me. Yeah, well, not even by security. I've seen videos of like Triple H and stuff kicking people's ass when they jump in the ring. Um, and yeah, they have zero tolerance for that. So even though I think Sean thought it was funny and kind of cool that I had done that. In the other leagues, they will kick your ass. They have zero tolerance for that. So definitely don't do that. That's not the way to get into wrestling nowadays. Um,
S-
and my first impression of Sean was, you know, I think initially, because I'd seen him on the NWF public access show, and also seen him live. Sean, for as young as he was in amazing shape and had amazing ability. He was so much better than all of us, um, talent wise. And, I'd watched him wrestle that night. And so when I got to talk to him, I was, it was like meeting a rock star, and to have him take time to talk to me and, you know, be cool to me and then kind of invite me into their circle was such an honor. So like, I mean, I fell in love with him immediately. He's just such a great guy. And it was it was weird to start out with, because I had so much respect for him as a wrestler, and he was like this entity on TV for me, and then to get to know him as a person and hang out with him and be, actual friends with him. It was a interesting transition, to go from like, I don't know that he was a hero of mine, before I met him, but definitely somebody I looked up to then being, somebody you're at 7-Eleven getting hot dogs with. It's going from that one, because to me he was like a famous person.
yeah, like meeting a celebrity.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. He's like a celebrity, and then eventually you're just doing stupid things that teenagers do together. Yeah, it was a weird, um, but good uh, transition, and I'm super happy that 40 years later, we don't see each other all the time or talk all the time, but to still have a relationship with them and be able to text them out of the blue. Um, yeah, it's wonderful. I'm so glad that I got to be friends with them. So
Yeah. and Sky Sports Video News asks, Jamie, what was your first memory of wrestling in NWF?
Oh boy. I have a lot. I think one of the coolest memories I have is have you ever seen the movie Pee-wee's Big Adventure?
Yeah, Sean has told me about this. I'm a big fan of Pee Wee Herman, so I need to know you'd face one of them.
Yeah, yeah. So in the movie, for anybody who hasn't seen it, in the movie, Pee-wee starts talking to a waitress and hangs out with her overnight, and they just like watch the sunrise. It's totally platonic. Um, but in the morning, her boyfriend shows up, and her boyfriend is like this 7'5" giant guy. And unfortunately, I can't remember his name right now, but he got into wrestling, and I think he was either wrestling in the Indies or may have been doing some work in the AWA. Anyways, he came down to a dry dock show with some other folks, and he was in the ring, and he was like, "Does anybody want to spar with me?" And everybody was like, "Fuck no," because we're 13, 14, and this guy's literally like 7.5 feet tall. And I was like, "I'll do it," because I mean, the guy was a monster and was terrifying, but you know, it's wrestling, right? His job is to take care of me and make sure I don't get hurt. It's not like he was actually going to kick my ass, and so I think everybody was a little afraid to spar with him, but I knew, his job is to not hurt me, right? And so we got to spar a little bit in the ring. So that was and he signed a 8.5 by, like a 8.5 by 11 promotional photo of him chasing Pee Wee Herman. And I had it for years, and I lost it I lived in my bedroom was in a basement at one point, and there was a flood, and a bunch of my stuff got ruined. And so I lost the 8 by 10 got ruined at that point, but that was a good memory. I had a great match with Sean, which we did on the NWF podcast that I'm super proud of. Uh, watching it back now, you're like, oh, you should have done this, you should have done that, but
Yeah,
I'm really proud of that match. Sean did a great job of taking care of me and putting me over. And so that was a lot of fun, match wise. And then we did some armory cards, the dry dock cards. They were mostly a vehicle to do our TV tapings, so there wasn't a whole lot of people there. The few cards that we did at the armory had hundreds of people in
yeah,
attendance, and so even though that match wasn't nearly as those matches weren't as nearly as good as the match with Sean, it was the most like being in a like a NWA like arena event. You walk through the crowd, past all the there's people in folding chairs on either side of you. Walk down the aisle, you get in the ring, there's the spotlights up top, there's people cheering. And so, uh, I love that memory as well. So different, I don't have a single favorite NWF memory. I have multiple great memories of being in the NWF. So,
yeah. And it was obviously, well, it was very fond memories.
yeah.
Um, JC Fresh asks, Jimmy, how could I get you on my podcast?
I mean, I'm happy to be on anybody's podcast. I'm always amazed when people want me on their podcast. I don't think that I'm very interesting, but you know, I mean, I got a couple of good stories, but I'm always happy to be on a podcast and chit chat with folks, especially folks I haven't met before. So
Yeah, and the reason I'm interested in you is because he didn't have much training, or as you said there, he didn't have much experience, and you got in there and was able to do drop kicks with not with kind of good looking gear and things like that.
thanks. Yeah, I remember my I think I started out with like a karate gi and like sweatpants, and the sweatpants back then, or at least the sweatpants I had, didn't have an elastic waistband. They had like a shoestring that went through it, and you tied the shoestring and to keep them up. But somehow, like in the wash or something, the shoestring had fallen out. So when I would put on my sweatpants, they would just fall off. And so if you notice, I'm wearing a sash, which is like it's like a long, thin, it's almost like a scarf. I think tied around my waist, and it's my mom's sash that I have tied around my waist, holding up my sweatpants. Um, Later on, I was such a mark for Sean, uh, that and this was a huge mistake, but in our by the time we wrestled each other, I was also wearing a amateur wrestling singlet like he was. So we're both wearing the same exact outfit. If you notice in our match together, which the funny thing is, he's wearing they were reversible. So the one side was blue and you could flip it inside out and it was red. And I would think, oh, maybe I should flip mine inside out so I'm red and he's blue. But no, I just dressed exactly like Sean, which was a huge mistake. So it was
Yeah.
an homage to him, but not a good look wrestling wise. So
And speaking of Sean, I have a match here. I think it was in the No Armory, you versus Sean.
did I wrestle Sean in the Armory?
Maybe not. I don't know where it might have been. I just thought it was in the No.
Yeah, no, I think my match against Sean was at the Dry Dock. Was
Okay.
at one of those TV tapings. Yeah, I don't think we wrestled at the Armory. I think I did one singles match and
Sorry.
Second match of the night.
Sorry.
yes, yeah, this is the Dry Dock.
Sorry about that.
Oh, that's all right. Yeah, this is the Dry Dock match. So this is that non-alcoholic bar where we used to do TV tapings.
And with you being in the NWF and I suppose you got to live your dream at such a young age, wrestling in front of a crowd, as you've seen the likes of Hulk Hogan, one of your favorites, and Arn Anderson, as you said, was one of your favorites. You get to wrestle in front of a crowd. How was that?
I loved wrestling in front of a crowd, and oh god, is this where I fall through the ropes and get stuck? Yep.
Oh, how'd that happen?
This was humiliating because I couldn't get up. Yeah, that. Oh yeah, and you see that thing on the back of my pants? That's the sash I was talking about. Um, Again, wrestling. There are people that get nervous doing public speaking and that sort of thing, and but I got to trace it back to when I was a kid and my family members throwing change at me when I'm lip syncing Kiss songs. Always loved being in front of a crowd. And so, uh, wrestling in front of people it was my favorite thing. I loved it so much. So yeah, you'll notice in this clip, both wearing boots. His boots are blue, baby blue. Mine are white, but both wearing black sweatpants, both wearing the wrestling singlet, and I'm wearing a t-shirt because I'm fat.
And
But
what's been your favorite match in the NWF?
oh, I hate to say it, but this one, I know that's egotistical or whatever, but I was just so proud to be able to wrestle against Sean, and I thought we did really good. Um, so when I go to watch, this is my favorite one to watch, and I know that's not humble, and I know I should be, and I really am humble, but I'm really proud that I was able to do this. So this is my
Yeah,
favorite match.
and Sean actually says that he didn't know how much you actually looked up to him in back in the day. So it must have been incredible wrestling one of like a person who you recognize as a celebrity who really after that just came buddies with you, but a guy who you really looked up to. How'd that feel?
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, I took so much of the wrestling moves that I did from Sean because I thought he looked so great at it. He just, the way he was built, he just had this snap to all his moves and this definition that was super good. And so, although I was inspired by Ric Flair's knee drop and Dusty Rhodes' elbow and that sort of thing, like I was really inspired by a lot of stuff Sean did as well. So um I almost wonder if we watch this match, if we'll see us, see Sean's moves, and at some point see me stealing those, copying those moves in this match. So
And were you there when the shoot matches were going on in the NWF?
I was not, thankfully.
Because I was going to ask you about that, but so you were there more when they were coming to an end, maybe with the Inoka Armory and stuff.
Yeah. We only did a couple of Armory shows when I was with the company, and we kind of switched to this dry dock era, which was more for TV taping, and I think maybe half of the dry dock shows, half of the matches on the dry dock shows were like the older adult, like the adult wrestlers. So it was kind of split between the younger guys and the older guys. But I mean, even when we were doing this, God, I feel like there was maybe only 10 or 12 young guys um, still in the league. So it was a pretty small pool at that point.
Yeah, and I've as I watched the documentary and the book, I know that Stephen Larry were a big reason for the NWF ended and stuff.
Yeah.
And they'd stole the ring and stuff. So how did you feel when you realised that Stephen Larry had betrayed Sean?
You know, I didn't have that many interactions with Larry. Um, I had plenty of interactions with Steve, and you know, I hate to shit on Steve, just because I feel like everybody does, and you know, he loved wrestling too, and that's why he was involved with us. And I think that had Steve not been involved with the league wouldn't have been as good as it was. I think Steve brought a lot of resources and ideas to Sean at the beginning and stuff. So, you know, again, I'm glad he was part of it. But he did do things that made people angry. And, you know, unfortunately left his history with the league in a lot of people's mind a negative one, which is unfortunate, you know, because he was, you know, it's kind of like what I was talking about earlier with the butterfly effect. Like if this one thing hadn't happened, all these other things wouldn't have happened. If Steve had never been the NWF and its path would have looked much different. So it's unfortunate that, as important as he was to the NWF, he had done things that kind of tarnished his memory for a lot of people with the NWF. So, um, but yeah, now, my wrestling boots, if you notice in here, I mean, those were really expensive at the time, especially when, you know, you're a kid and you don't really have a job, you know, you just have odd jobs. I believe they were $125, which was an astronomical, you know, it was probably like $500 today. It was a crazy amount of money to raise as a kid. And so I worked a bunch of odd jobs, like, you know, raking leaves and doing yard work and stuff like that to get that money. And I was super proud that I had the boots, and I loaned them to Steve and never got them back. So if there's anybody that should be angry with Steve, it's me, you know, because Sean still has his boots. I would love to have my, you know, boots. Why am I not taking advantage of that?
And
um,
it still makes sense like why a lot of the guys didn't like Steve and still don't because of what he's done. I know he
yeah,
was a very big part of of the league. Sean says that him and Steve are probably some of the best. You know
yeah,
because of Steve's bumping and stuff. He was incredible.
yeah.
But
Oh, absolutely.
go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, yeah, I can't believe I totally, you know, skipped over that. You know, Steve was a great wrestler. Um, you know, I think him and Sean had the ability, had it not been for their lack of size, um, had the ability to go on to be in the big leagues. You know, they could both talk, they could wrestle, they could sell. You know, but unfortunately, at the time, you know, in the '80s, to be a wrestler, you had to be a monster. You know, for the most part, you know, like there were a lot of guys in AWA and NWA that weren't monsters, but you know, the WWF was taking off, and all those guys were enormous. And yeah, Steve and Sean just didn't have the size, which is really unfortunate. So, because I think
So,
nowadays there's like some junior weight guys, right?
yeah, and I think that's all thanks to Sean Waltman, aka X Pac, and a lot of the
Yeah,
other cruiserweights. He was one of the first guys that came in, and a lot of people looked up to him because of that. A lot of the smaller guys.
yeah, I could see that. Also from Minnesota, right?
Yep,
Yeah, yeah, another wrestler from Minnesota. So
a lot. And with you being in the NWF, did you ever get like stick at school, or like did you ever get mocked at school for being a wrestler at that age?
uh not really. I didn't have a lot of friends in school. I mostly hung out with Sean and Slick Steenerson and Dixie Dave. And those guys. Dave went to my school, but Sean and Slick, they were a couple years older than me, and they went to a different school. And actually, I think Sean had quit school at that point. But so I didn't really, in my free time, I didn't really hang out with kids from my school or was friends with kids from my school. I just kind of kept my head down and went to school and got the hell out of there as soon as I could. So um, I don't know that a lot of people knew that I did wrestling in my school, so nobody really made fun of me for it. Yeah.
And then did your parents always approve of you doing wrestling? Did they, or were they ever afraid of you getting hurt?
No, they didn't care. My parents weren't very good parents, but in some respects, that's a good thing because I basically got to do whatever I want. Whatever I wanted. Nobody cared what I did. Um, so my dad was a little bit into wrestling. Like I remember, I didn't see him a whole lot, but I vividly remember talking to him on the phone about Greg the Hammer Valentine once. That was his favorite wrestler. And um, I don't know if any of them ever came to see me, if either of them ever came to see me wrestle. Yeah, I don't think so. So they didn't care, but they also didn't support me.
Hmm. And with you, the reason I asked that is because have you ever seen the Brian Zane video of the NWF? Where were the parents?
It sounds familiar. I don't think so though.
It was called Wrestling with Regret. So he done another take on the NWF. He done like quite a funny type of one.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. I have seen that. Yeah, I saw it years and years ago. Yeah. It was a great little documentary. So,
Yeah, and watching that, did you ever feel a bit offended with some of the stuff he was saying, or did you just find it funny?
no, I thought it was funny. There was nothing like the NWF before the NWF. And so, he's repeatedly in the show, he's like, "Where are these kids' parents?" you know. But parenting was much different in the 80s, 70s and 80s. And also, I think a lot of and maybe I'm just projecting, but I think a lot of kids in the league came from uh, maybe rough upbringings where parents may be into illicit things or alcoholics or just neglectful. Um, a lot of times, coming from poverty, parents are doing everything they can to scrape by and spending a lot of time with their kids, or they're working two jobs, they don't have the time for their kids, and so the kids just kind of run wild. And so I think that that's maybe what a lot of us in the league had as parents. And so they were just like, just get out of the house. Yeah, I'm clawing to get by. Just don't get arrested or don't get anybody pregnant. And they're like, whatever else you're doing, we don't care. And so and back then, it was pretty common, like you'd come to school and one or two kids would have a cast on their arm. Yeah, yeah, from crashing on their bike or falling out of a tree they were climbing or whatever. And now, I work for a school district. I never see kids with casts. And so I don't know if kids are just doing way less dangerous stuff or we were doing way more dangerous stuff. But I think at the time, even though it was, it was the kind of first of its kind, um, it was no different than or more dangerous than kids building wacky bike jumps or uh, like a rope swing in between two trees or we used to do all kinds of crazy stuff where we'd fall and break our arms. So wrestling was not that much different.
I think now it would have been a lot different, with the NWF and the funding and stuff. So nowadays, I don't think you would get away with it.
Yeah, probably not. I think there was a generation of kids that was raised by parents like that, and a lot of times uh kids end up being the opposite of what their parents were. So the kids that were raised with no supervision now are raising kids and they're supervising them like crazy, right? When I was a kid, there was no school pickup and drop off. Parents never picked up or dropped off their kids. You either rode the bus or walked. And now there's if I'm at school at 2:30 or 3 o'clock, there's a giant line of cars of people picking up their kids or dropping off their kids in the morning. And like that was never a thing. And so, parents are way more involved with their kids, which is probably good. And definitely, supervising their kids way more than we were supervised. And it's probably because they felt that maybe a bit of neglect. And so they're making sure their kids don't feel like that. And so I don't know if this generation of kids growing up now who probably feel like they're getting too much parenting that when they have kids are not going to overparent, and it's that ping pong effect of too much supervision, not enough supervision. So yeah, I don't know that the NWF would happen today. um at least where it's fully kid run. I mean, we had zero adults helping us out. It was Sean and somewhat Steve, and that was it.
Yeah,
Um,
maybe a bit of Dr. Dread.
yeah, he came in a bit towards the end. Um, I mean, Sean had put on dozens of Armory cars before Jeff, who's Dr. Dread, came in. So,
Jeff Dinsmore.
yeah, Jeff Dinsmore.
And so the reason I wanted to talk to you about that documentary is I'd like to hear some all around the way of wrestlers' take on Brian Zane and that little documentary series about the NWF. Another thing that he said was it became actually quite a famous trend was old man Tronson. He would have kept saying that about Scott Tronson, and I found out that Scott Tronson was not an old man at all. Uh, did you ever have to go through Scott Tronson?
I did not. At the time, I'd heard Sean's horror stories about Tronson, and so I knew who he was. I don't know that I'd ever seen him, and he may have been he may have, and again I could be incorrect, um, but I never saw him, so I don't know if he wasn't involved in public access by the time I got involved. Uh, and I do remember the old man Tronson thing from from the Wrestling with Regret documentary. I thought it was hilarious, and just like you, I had thought he was an old man as well, and then found out later that he wasn't an old man. He was, I think, probably in his 20s. But I mean, he acted like an old man. So,
He always caused loads of
you know,
problems.
yeah, just like shitting on kids, and my perception is if he's working for public access, he's probably, like anyone wants to do a good job. And, you know, when a bunch of first of all, wrestling is, at least back then, was thought of as kind of a lowbrow thing, something that poor people are into. And then so, okay, there's this TV show on my channel that's a lowbrow thing, and then it's done by kids. So, nobody takes kids seriously, or at least they didn't. And so I would think for this guy who's trying to do a good job, there's this brow thing of kids fucking around, and in no way do I think he was right thinking that, but I'm just trying to put myself into his shoes and thinking, is this guy just being a jerk to be a jerk? You know, and I don't know that was it. My thought was he was probably trying to make the stuff they put on public access the best that it could be because he wants to be proud of what he does, and he can't stop this lowbrow activity that's being put on by kids. Um, and so that's, that would be my guess as to why he did it. It's entirely possible he's just a dick, but I try to give people the benefit of the doubt, and I try to, put myself in their shoes, because I want people to, it's the golden rule, right? Treat people the way you want to be treated. And so, um, I want people to treat me with respect and to be fair to me and not make assumptions about me. Um, and so, although I love the old man Tronson, me, shtick in the video and stuff like that, I really gave it some thought and thought about, why would he do this? And that's the best thing I could come up with, other than, he's just being a jerk to be a jerk, which there are plenty of people who are a jerk just to be a jerk and they like being a jerk, but that would be my guess. So, old man Tronson.
And Sky Sports Video News says, Jamie, we love seeing you on these podcasts. You need to co-host a few more episodes with Sean on NWF.
I would love to. I just I always feel it's funny. We've been talking for an hour, and I always worry before these podcasts that I'll have nothing to say, and I hope that I hope that I haven't bored everybody with my analogies and stories of childhood and all that stuff. Unfortunately, um, doing the stuff with Sean. I love talking to Sean. I love talking to Dave. And talking about the old days and stuff. The downside for me is I wasn't in the NWF kind of in its heyday, so I missed a lot of that. So I don't know the story and the stories, a lot before I came in. I just know the stuff that happened when I was there, which was a pretty short time, 2 or 3 years until it was done. And even, so even then, it was 37 years ago, right? So a lot of the stuff I don't kind of remember. And then, when all the territories went away, Mid-South and WCCW and Jim Crockett turned into WCW and was trying to compete with the cartoonishness of the WWF. Where they put the guy in the silver spray painted stormtrooper helmet, and he just, they're trying to compete on that cartoonish level. And then at the same time, I'm getting older as a teenager. I was like, wrestling sucks,
So you stopped liking it?
So I stopped watching because it got, I grew up more and more and got more mature at the time where wrestling got more and more childish, and so it just didn't appeal to me anymore, unfortunately. And so, uh, and then, there was the Attitude Era and stuff like that, but I had already moved on to playing music and riding BMX and stuff. So that would have probably been a good time for me to get reintroduced into wrestling because it was not childish or, not aimed at children, not trying to sell toys anymore necessarily, like it was in the 80s.
Yeah.
So that would have been a good time for me to get reintroduced to wrestling. Unfortunately, it didn't happen. I've gotten familiar with that era and a lot of 90s wrestling and stuff since then, just from being on YouTube and the algorithm figuring out like, oh, Jamie kind of likes wrestling. And so I get pushed, these YouTube shorts and Instagram reels about, uh, you know, um, Gold Dust, who started after I stopped watching and ended, so I missed his entire career, but I see all these clips about Gold Dust, and so I've learned stuff about Gold Dust and wrestlers from that era, The Rock and that sort of thing. So to answer your question, Sky Sports, in the longest possible fashion, um, I get nervous because I feel like I don't have much to talk about because I can't talk about current wrestling or 90s wrestling because I wasn't, part of that or wasn't watching at that point. And then I just had my short era. And then, the previous era before me is hard for me to talk about because I don't, so I feel like I don't have that much to contribute, to be honest. So that's probably why you don't see me as much on the NWF show as you do, like Dave and that sort of thing. So
And with you being obviously when the NWF stopped, did you leave before the NWF stopped, or did the NWF stop before you left?
that is a good question. So I'd lived with my mom, and I can't remember what age, probably 13. She decided she didn't want me to live with her anymore.
Oh,
And
okay.
so sent me to live with my dad, who lived probably about 45 minutes north of Coon Rapids. And, because Sean only lived a few minutes away from me by car when I lived with my mom. And so, he'd come over, we'd go and hang out. It was easy to pick me up. But once I moved out to my dad's, I wasn't old enough to have a license. And I think it was far, gas cost money and we were kids. We didn't have a lot of money. So, driving out 45 minutes to pick up Jamie to go do something and then drive 45 minutes back costs gas money, so we didn't hang out as much because I lived farther away. And so we kind of lost touch and yeah, so I guess the answer is I moved away and I don't know what happened to the league. I don't know if I mean I know it ultimately ended, but yeah, I didn't there was no like this is the final day or anything like that. So yeah.
But how did you feel when you heard that the league stopped?
Uh Good and bad. Good, there wasn't a whole lot of us younger guys left towards the end or at least in the dry dock era. And so but I know what I had heard at the time was the league had stopped, but that Sean and Slick
Any Ellis?
Steenerson
Mm,
had gone and started wrestling for Eddie Sharkey, which
mhm.
was the kind of independent league, adult league in Minnesota. So even though I was, a bit sad that the NWF was over, I always thought Sean was talented enough to make it in wrestling, and be a famous professional wrestler. And so for him, and I mean Sharky trained, the Road Warriors, Scott Hall, Nikita Khrushchev, like one of the demolition guys, like he trained a bunch of those dudes. And so I was like, holy shit, Sean's gonna make it, Uh Troy Steenerson, Slick Steenerson is gonna make it because they're wrestling with Eddie, and so I was super happy that, you know, those guys who I thought were really talented had a shot at, you know, wrestling for a living, so it was kind of a good thing and a bad thing. Um, at the end of the league. So
Yeah, and so did you get wrestling with Eddie Sharkey? Yeah,
I'm sorry, what was that?
did you get wrestling with Eddie Sharkey?
I did not. I told this story on the NWF podcast, I think, but uh, they do this thing in the states called the muscular dystrophy drive, and I believe it's over Labor Day weekend every year, and they do like a 24-hour telethon on TV where you can call in and you can donate money, and they have a bunch of stars that are on it. Um, well, anyways, I saw in the newspaper that they were going to do a 24-hour wrestling event, and at this place called Pepper's Dance Land in Minneapolis. And Minneapolis was probably 16 miles away from where I lived, but when you have a car, 16 miles is real far when you don't have a car.
Yeah.
Uh, and it's not like other places where we had really good mass transit. Um, so I was 12, I think, and I told my mom, "Hey, I'm going to spend the night at this wrestling thing," and she's like, "Okay." I'm like, "It's in Minneapolis." She's like, "Whatever." So I called the bus company and I say, "Hey, I need to get to such and such place." And so they give me, on paper, I write down a list of the time of which buses, I had to take like 6 different buses and be there at certain times. So I take all these buses downtown to Pepper's Dance Land, and I go, and it's an Eddie Sharkey show. And I don't know how they thought this was a good idea. How are they going to have wrestling for 24 hours, right? Like,
Yeah.
are, are they going to just have a bunch of the same matches over and over? Like, what? I mean, that's an insane thing to do.
How did they not
So
enough roster?
I I mean, they probably only had maybe 25 people on the roster, and so I'm just like, whatever, man. I'm just here to see fucking wrestling, So, I made myself a bunch of peanut butter sandwiches and in my backpack. I had no money. I'm 12, and so they have some matches, and it was like 30 minutes between each match, like just me sitting in the front row and there was hardly anybody in the audience, and they would have these giant extended just breaks where nothing was happening. Uh, and then finally at about, I don't know, I don't even remember how many matches they had. I think I got there at maybe 7 o'clock, and around 1 o'clock in the morning, I think I was the last person in the place, like last audience member, you know, and there's no buses back home. And so finally Eddie comes out and he's like, "Hey bud, where are your parents?" And I'm like, "I took the bus here," and I'm excited for the next match. And he's like, "Well, since you're the only person here, we don't really want to have any more matches. We want to close, you know, we want to end the show." And I was like, "Well, I don't have any money. I don't have anywhere to go, and the bus doesn't start running till 8 in the morning. What am I supposed to do?" You know? Um, and he's like, "Well, how about do you want to stay at my house, and then I can take you home have somebody take you home in the morning?" And I was like, "Okay." So yeah, I just totally go with a strange man to his house. Thankfully, he wasn't a creep. But yeah, Eddie takes me to his house. I meet his wife, who was also a famous female wrestler. I think her name was Princess Little Cloud. I think she wrestled in the 60s.
Mm.
Um, and I met his son, who was my age, who had zero interest in wrestling. uh, and I remember talking to his son because it was like staying in his son's room with his son. And I was like, "How crazy is it that your dad's Eddie Sharkey?" And he's like, "What? Why do you care?" He was just so
And
not
nothing to.
impressed, so not impressed that his dad was Eddie Sharkey. Uh, but yeah, so I spent the night there, and in the morning, they made me, eggs, bacon, and toast. I had breakfast with his family. He was super great. His wife was great. And then one of the wrestlers came by and picked me up and drove me back home. So um, yeah, couldn't have been cooler. Eddie Sharkey was such a great guy. So
And was he shocked to hear that you had wrestled with Crusher?
he I don't trying to remember. I don't know if he knew Sean. I don't think we brought up the NWF at all. This might have been before I was involved with the NWF. Actually, now that I think about it, I can't remember for sure. But yeah, I don't remember talking to him about it anyways.
And when the NWF had stopped and closed down, and the league had stopped, and he sold it to Ernie Ellis, you'd started up your own wrestling company, the CWF, as well, just for kids, didn't you?
Yeah, I actually started up mine during the NWF, but the NWF was it was so intermittent how often things would happen. Um, I was raring to go. I want to wrestle every week, and that just wasn't where we're at. And so being in the NWF, I made friends with some of the other wrestlers, obviously, and so I was like, hey, I'm going to start my own thing, and it was never to compete with the NWF. It was just to kind of it was to complement it and kind of fill in, so we had something to do until the NWF had a show or had something going on. And so I pulled in some guys from that, um, and we did. Again, we had no place to put a ring, no place to practice. So we I went to the public access station and got certified on the equipment. So I could, because not everybody had cameras on their phones back then, or even video cameras. Uh, so you would take this. You would take a class and then you would take a test proving that you knew how to work the camera and take care of the camera or the editing equipment at the public access office. And so I was able to check out cameras and hang a big red blanket in my bedroom and get all the guys together, and we could do interviews. That was super easy, but again, we had nowhere for the ring, so we shot a bunch of interviews, and we only ever ended up having, I think, one or two events, because that involved finding somebody with a truck to bring the ring to the park. I would, the park had like a gazebo, like a covered area with a concrete pad. And I'd call the city and got a permit so we could set up for the day to set up the ring under the gazebo, so we'd have some shade. But just uh, the logistics of running a league, the lack of funding. We had no money, and getting people to take you seriously was hard. And so unfortunately, not a whole lot came from that, but it was a good way to fill some time while we were waiting for NWF stuff to happen. And also because of that, I learned, I spent a lot of time like calling bars or just different venues to see, like, hey, could we come in and put on a wrestling show, and we get the money at the door, but then a lot of people will drink, so let us do it for free. And so or like calling the city and trying to get permits. There's not a lot of 12, 13-year-old kids doing that sort of thing. And so that really taught me a lot, um that I think helped set me up, for the rest of my life, being comfortable to just talk to strangers and try to make things happen, because there's a lot that's involved with a wrestling show, if you think about it, getting chairs for people to sit on, and tickets, and are you going to see pre-sale tickets, and insurance, right? Like one of the things we used to do in BMX is, people would say, oh, we don't want you to have a BMX contest here because what if somebody gets hurt? We don't want to get sued. And so one of the things we did was we set it up. The Boy Scouts has insurance, Boy Scouts of America. And if you can set up your event to be like a Boy Scout event, and then everybody who signs up automatically is signed up with the Boy Scouts, and then they're covered by the Boy Scouts insurance. You know what I mean? So like figuring that stuff out, ways to make things happen. As a young adult, or as a teenager, getting experience with that stuff really helped me be successful in a lot of things that I wanted to as an adult. So yeah, so
And you,
that's the good and bad of the CWF, I guess.
and did you get on a show? Did you get a show anywhere?
We just did the two shows out at the park, and I believe I came across a video cassette of one a couple months ago, and I've been digitizing all my grandmother's old cassettes, video cassettes, and I believe I came across one a couple months ago. I need to go through and look at that. But yeah, if it's digitized, I was going to send it to Sean for the NWF podcast. So hopefully soon we'll get to see that.
And would with the all the other guys, like I'm sure you got in a lot of the NWF guys, but did you ever get any new kids in?
I did not know. I didn't have a lot of friends at school, so you know, it wasn't like I had a pool of friends to ask, to join. Um, so no new wrestlers in the CWF, unfortunately.
With how did the CWF close?
Just with the moving of moving to my dad's house, yeah, just that whole thing kind of changed everything for me. So,
And I heard the Crusher made you work for the ring. He didn't just give the ring straight to you. He made you work for it.
well, the ring, I built the ring. Um, so he had shared with me, because the NWF had done a couple of different ring designs throughout the years, and the last ring they had was, the real professional ring. Um, but the ring previous to that, he had built out of wood and in three sections, and so he gave me, like, he drew up plans for it, and then I built the ring in my grandparents' backyard. So it was like three sections. I think it was probably 2 feet tall, and yeah, you just bolt it together, and then you can unbolt it and stack it, and it'll fit in the back of a truck. And like the ring posts were like fence posts. They were like wooden fence posts, and so um, yeah, so it wasn't a gift from Sean. The design was a gift from Sean, but the ring itself was something that I built.
Yeah, what he told me was that you had asked him for the ring, and he had told you to work for it, pretty much.
Oh yeah, I don't recall that, but hey, is there any chance we could take a pee break?
Yeah, no
Would
problem.
that mess? Okay, I'm gonna go to the bathroom. I'll be right back.
Okay, no problem. These are some incredible stories from the Irish Terror, Jamie McParland. That's why he takes a little break here. I'll tell you what we'll have coming up next. Um, Coming up next, I have international wrestling star from actually the UK, but now wrestles on CTW in Portugal, and he's wrestled in Northern Ireland. Andy Hendricks. I can't wait to have him on. He's been wrestling from 2013, so that'll be an incredible guest to be getting on. Um, yeah, so I'll just wait for Jamie to come back here. Get into some of the comments. So it Gadget Gizmo give a message for Jamie there. I'll wait for him to come back and for Jamie. Oh, there we go. Comment from Sky Sports Video News says, Keaton, how did you feel after your match with the Globetrotter? Yeah, the Globetrotter, a guy who's wrestled in Canada once and didn't even defend the belt. But we'll not get into that. So the Canary Kid, aka right now known as the Globetrotter, Ricky Henry, was incredible having a match with him. To be honest with you, he's such a well experienced wrestler, and getting to be in the ring with someone who's trained me and stuff was incredible. And then after it, the feeling of that I've just accomplished a great match after it was incredible. Going back and getting told that it was a good match and stuff, and the feeling that it was so a feeling of relief that it all went out well as well. It was a surreal moment as well. Sky Sports Video News says Keaton, I love it. I don't like his new name either. No, I think calling him the Globetrotter isn't the best name. Seeing he's not travelled all around the globe. He's wrestled in Canada once, but uh, I have to give the respect to him. He did take the title off me. I mean, he did retain the title, so he is the champion. But I do think it was robbed out of that match.
Okay, I'm back.
Back. So I was interacting with some of the fans there while you were away,
Nice.
talking about the NWF Championship match.
Nice.
It was an absolute honor being able to wrestle for that championship.
That's
Um,
amazing.
I was a fan of the NWF before I'd met Sean, and I'd watched it, the podcast and stuff. So it was incredible wrestling for that title.
Yeah.
So it was kind of like the way you were, watching the NWF.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm so happy that the title got reconstituted and that you guys are actively doing stuff with it. It's really cool to see. So
Yeah, and so when the NWF it ended, you'd obviously stopped wrestling uh, the whole way through, and then the NWF podcasts came about, and you were inducted into the NWF Wrestling Hall of Fame. How did that feel?
that was, I don't even know that I can put into words how proud of that I am. You know, to be recognized for something like that, years and years later is made me feel over the moon. It's something I'm proud of, and I have the plaque hanging in my living room, and yeah, it's incredible. I'm I'm so honored that anybody voted for me. So I really appreciate everyone that did. That really means a lot and really made me feel good. So yeah,
And as Hall of Famer, what's your overall opinion on the NWF title coming back?
I couldn't have been happier. Uh, when I was first on the NWF podcast, I think that was right around the time Sean discovered you guys doing this stuff over in the UK, and we were so excited to see you guys doing it, um, and just how professional, how much more professional you guys look than us, um, how much better you guys are than us
Because we got more
than we
training.
were. Yeah, and it's so great, and even this, you doing this on your podcast, you doing a podcast, like it's nothing in life is, well, I was going to say nothing is given to you in life, but there are plenty of people who things are given to you in life. But for the most part, for lower middle class kids, you got to work for everything. And so to see you and a bunch of other young folks making things happen is so cool. And I know that even if you don't end up in the big leagues, having this sort of personality and drive, you guys are going to be successful in everything you do in life. And I'm so happy there's kids out there, taking life by the balls and being like, this is what I want to do, and I'm going to do it. And I don't know how to do it, but I'm going to figure it out. I mean, that's what makes our world and our society move forward is kids like you, um, deciding like, hey, we're going to do this, and not knowing how to do it and figuring it out. Just gives me so much faith in the future of just humanity in general. So
Yeah.
I hate to put the weight of the world on your shoulders, Keaton, but you know, um, I'm so proud for you guys and of you guys, and I know what you guys are doing now is such an amazing product, and it's great entertainment, and I just know going forward that you guys are going to be a success in whatever you put your minds to, and hopefully it's good things. And
Yeah.
I'm excited to see the future in general with kids like you at the helm. So
Thanks very much. But the reason that we're all doing this is because the NWF paved the way. With the likes of you and Mr. Macho, just for example, and Crusher and
ah
people like that. They were incredible. And the reason I started watching the NWF and thought to myself, I could do this. And so it's really all thanks to you guys, to be fair.
yeah, no, yeah, I mean, to me it's all it's all Sean. We were just cogs in the wheel, marching to his drum. And but I think a lot of us learned from him. And uh, you brought up Mr. Macho's name. He was also one of my favorite wrestlers in the NWF, on a professional level as a wrestler.
I
He
think his
was
character was good.
his character was he was such a great heel. He was so good at talking, and then he was so good at wrestling too. And I loved him as a person. He was one of my favorite people to hang out with, and we actually, excuse me, we actually hung out outside of wrestling, and he really helped me out with the CWF stuff. He actually, as a gift, purchased the ropes for the ring that I built and gave them to me. So, which is very nice because again, none of us had any money, and so I don't know if he was mowing lawns and went to the hardware store and bought ropes and gave them to me or what, but yeah, I know he didn't have any money, and so it was incredibly generous. I know you just think, oh, it was just ropes, big deal, but back then when we had no money and weren't working jobs, for him to be that thoughtful and help out that league was incredible. And yeah, he was a super nice guy, and I really wish he'd be on the NWF podcast. So
Yeah, he should be in the
looking
Hall of
forward to
Fame if
that.
he's not already.
Oh, I I think he is. I think he's no, he definitely is. And he might be in it more than once.
Tag teams.
Yeah, I think he's in as a single and as a member of a tag team, if I'm not mistaken. So, because I remember, because on some of the NWF podcasts, I would ask Sean if he'd seen him, and he'd say no. But then I think when Mr. Macho was got his plaque, Sean was able to personally hand it off to him, and I think I remember seeing pictures of him and Sean together
Mm.
when he was handing over the plaque. So it was good to see him. But yeah, I would love to hear him because he was in the NWF way longer than I was, and so I'd really like to hear his backstory and what he's been up to and his experience in the NWF as well. So yeah, Mr. Macho was Macho and Slick Steenerson as a tag team were phenomenal. So
Yeah, and as we're coming to the end of the podcast, I want to thank you very much for coming on. Um, I just want to get to this question from Mighty Molly because I've been wanting to ask you this as well. Have you seen that Sean is back in training? Could he compete again? He's talked about it, going back to the NIPW and having one last match.
uh, I didn't know he was quote unquote training, but I have seen some pictures because we're friends on Facebook. So I've seen some pictures where he's been exercising and lost some weight. So I thought maybe something was going on, and I do remember, when he was coming over to the UK to ref that match. I remember telling him like, "Hey, you should do a couple of moves. You should take some bumps in that match." Um, I do remember. I want to say in the probably late '90s, there was some talk about us having like a reunion card of all of us because at that point we were like in our 30s. Now we're in our 50s, so
Yeah, so
I
it didn't
think
really
it's
happen.
much less realistic now. And there was a time we were going to get together and all meet up in Las Vegas last winter, and I told my wife, I said, "Yeah, I think we're all gonna meet up in Vegas." And I was just messing with her, and I was like, "I'm gonna have one more match," and she's like, "You got to be fucking kidding me! You're gonna get killed." So she's like, "Do not wrestle." And so I think it's, I mean, in my heart of hearts, I feel like I got one more match in me, but honestly, I probably don't. But Sean's always been quite the physical specimen. So I mean, if anybody can train and get their act together, and I mean, he was amazing at taking bumps and all that stuff. So, if anybody could put the tights back on, put the boots back on, it's definitely Sean out of all of us. So I would love to see, I, I hesitate to say I would love to see Sean do one more match, just because I wouldn't want him to get hurt, and I wouldn't want him to feel encouraged by my stupid words and then end up getting hurt. But to be honest, I would love to see it, but yeah, I don't want him to get hurt. So
I'll have to get this one in here. The Canary Kid hasn't updated his name as the Globetrotter, but says Jamie as the new face of the NWF. Who would be your Mount Rushmore of the NWF?
I would say this is going to be controversial. Um, but for the old school guys, Sean Slick Steenerson, Mr. Macho, and I gotta say, Steve Engstrom. Eh, eh, you know, I know people would probably say Kid USA Kelsey, and I think he was a big part of the league, but he was never very nice to me, so I'm leaving him off for, from my Mount Rushmore, anyways.
I think you should be in that Mount Rushmore.
No, no, no. I wasn't there long enough. I didn't play a big enough role. I'm just glad. I think that I, unfortunately I feel like the amount my importance in the NWF has been greatly overblown um, than 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 the reality of it. There were so many people that had so much more to do with it, that put so much more work into it, and spent so much more time in it than I did. That I feel, you know, are way more deserving of being in the Hall of Fame, and way more deserving of being interviewed on podcasts like Keaton's and that sort of thing. I don't know. I got swept up in this, and I'm definitely not deserving, but I do appreciate people asking me questions and being interested. But yeah, way more people worthy, way more worthy than I am. So
Well, yeah, you can tell you're quite modest about it, to be fair. But I've got two more questions for you.
yeah.
I know we've been on here for a while. So, what's next for Jamie McParland?
Um. uh, uh. hmm, just living life, I guess. I work a job, working at a school district that I love, and helping kids. One of the things I get to do as a technology director is introduce technology to the schools. And when I was a kid, I hated school, and one of the things I like to think that I get to do is I think I get to make school more engaging for kids. And I hope that I get to do that. I hope that I make school less of a bummer for kids, and so, um, when you look back on your life, you think, well, what did I do with my life? And hopefully I helped thousands and thousands of kids get more of an education than they would have, because I tried to make school more interesting for them. And I'm super proud of that. And so I hope to continue to do that. Um, and a lot of my job is supporting teachers. Being a teacher is the hardest job I've ever seen anyone do, and it's a really thankless job. And so part of what I get to do is try to give them tools to make it easier for them to teach kids. And so I'm super proud of that. And so, yeah, I hope to continue to do that, and make music, play music with my friends, ride BMX bikes, hang out with my dog, and spend time with my wonderful wife. I know it's may not sound like the most exciting future, but it's a future that makes me happy, and I really look forward to. So,
And what advice would you give to a young trainee wrestler trying to start out in wrestling?
oh, I guess what I my advice would be to work. Remember to work hard. Nobody owes you anything. Um, be humble, because nobody wants to work with somebody who's an asshole. Uh, and spend a lot of your time putting other people over. Um, People remember that and appreciate that. And when you help out others when you need help, others are more likely to help you out. You know, you never know who's gonna, who's gonna end up where. And eh, and when I say that, it sounds like I'm saying, like, oh, do all this stuff so you can get ahead. But um, that's not exactly what I mean. Helping others, uh, at least for me, helping others makes me feel good, you know, um, and makes me a happier person in life. And so, yeah, help others. Um, but also, from the wrestling aspect, uh, protect yourself and protect, obviously protect the people in the ring. I can't imagine had I, done a pile driver to someone, and if we had an accident and they ended up, you know, with a permanent disability from it, how bad that would have made me feel for the rest of my life. So, do whatever it takes to keep them safe. Then beyond that, keep yourself safe. I know you want to entertain people. I know you want it to look as realistic as possible, and practice and train and do all that stuff so you can achieve that. But at the end of the day, you don't want to be the person on the end of the pile driver where, you know, you're stuck in a wheelchair the rest of your life. So yeah, protect others but also, protect yourself. So that would be my advice.
Yeah, thanks very much for coming on. It's been incredible having you on, and
Absolutely.
thanks so much for taking the time out.
Absolutely. Anytime, Keaton. I wish you the best luck. Stay safe. And
Thank you.
I have my fingers crossed that you'll be wearing the gold sooner rather than later.
Hopefully, hopefully.
Awesome.
See you. Thank you. See you soon.
All right. Take care, bud. Bye
Bye.
bye. Thank
And for the next Kayfabe with Keaton, we'll have coming on none other than, I mentioned it before. I'll just mention it again if you're new to it. Andy Hendricks. It'll be on Sunday, the 24th of August at 7 p.m. An international wrestling star who's been on CTW, NIPW, but is from the UK actually as well. So he's an international wrestling star who's been wrestling since 2013. We'll have so much memories to share. But anyway, that was an incredible interview with Jamie McParland. He has so many stories to tell. It's just so good listening to them. I hope you all enjoyed that, and hopefully we'll see you in the next one for Andy Roberts on the 24th. Bye for now.